May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer.
Amen.
So how many hits are we going for this week?
At least 70.
This is a terrific story. A soft spot in my heart for this gospel reading. This was the gospel that Lisa and I had read at our wedding. We did not run out of wine. We didn't have stone water jars on hand either. We did have the bishop there, so I guess we had a chance of doing something spectacular if it was necessary. But the story about, this is, I think, Jesus and his relationship with his mother, perhaps the most interesting. It is also, in some ways, Jesus at his most human in terms of what it means to be a son. And it is also Jesus who is compassionate and who does things that are spectacular without drawing attention to himself. And all of these can help to serve as examples for us as we seek to integrate what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians, how we understand, express, and offer our own gifts for the good of the kingdom. So I want to talk a little bit about these two texts in relationship to one another, and then to talk about how this is a call to us both as individuals and as a community of faith to do the things of God for the purposes of God. So first of all, there is this interesting exchange between Jesus and his mother, right? It's so completely classic, right? They have no wine, and Jesus says to his mother, I can never imagine saying this to my mother, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." Just like that. Your hour may have come in a way that you never realized it's come. I brought you into this world, by God, I'll take you out. But Jesus thinks he's kind of, I don't know, I mean, it's open to so much interpretation. This might be Mary's way of saying, come on now, you are still just my little boy, okay? I knew you back when I changed your diaper, let's just put it that way. Don't get all high and mighty with me. But it's also interesting to see just exactly how much weight she gives his rebuke, right? What did he say? My hour has not yet come. And the next words out of her mouth are, do whatever he tells you to do. It's like, he may be complaining, but we all know, everybody here knows, that he's going to do what I ask him to do. And so he does. And it's a story about generosity. It's a story about miraculous happenings. It's a story about what it means to give our best when our best may not be expected of us, to give the best that we have. And in some ways, I think that is a call to us as a community. And it's a call to us as a community in light of where we find ourselves individually and corporately in this call from Paul to talk and understand and to talk about and to exercise our spiritual gifts. Right? He goes through this litany of gifts, saying that we all have different gifts and not everybody incorporates all of those gifts into one person. Except maybe Dad? No, that's close. How about Jesus? Right? Remember, whenever the preacher asks the question, you're never go wrong by saying the answer to the question is Jesus. Jesus. Okay. Right. So we are in this way that we're bound to Jesus to trust him to do things that are beyond our ability to do. We've been talking in our our conversation about Romans on Sunday mornings together, about Paul's theology of weakness. Right? Paul says in more than one letter and in more than one place, God's greatness, God's power is made known through our weakness. Right? And that seems like an oxymoron to the beginning, but for any of us who have been to the end of our rope, we understand that it is precisely the place where God most powerfully and predictably shows up for us. When we get to the point where we throw up our hands and say, I can't do this. I'm going to give it to you, God. I talked to you a little bit before I went out for surgery about the foundation of recovery being in those first three steps. I can't, God can, I think I'll let God. I think that's an important thing for us to remember individually and as a community, regardless of our spiritual path. Because my belief is that especially as Westerners in this kind of culture, that we are all addicted to something. We're all addicted to something. And that our life is unmanageable in conversation with that one thing. And the only way out is to let go and to let God. And it requires work on our part. It requires the work to understand who we are. It requires work to understand that we are not completely defined by the best of our actions, nor are we defined by the worst that we've done. That our nature as being created in the image and likeness of God is that we are mixed blessings. But at the end of the day, we're blessings nonetheless, right? We just are who we are. I mean, is there anything more comfortable and comforting than that? One of the things that I admire most about people that I come into contact with in a spiritual sense is people who are comfortable in their own skin. They know the blessings and the gifts that they have, and they're willing to offer those up to God's greater glory. And they also know their limitations, and they're willing to confess those and to lay them open to the possibility that God can do something and will do something with those limitations if we are gracious enough to allow God to work with us, and to work with us without us seizing back control. At the end of the day, we're all in a position much like the stewards are when they're told by Mary that just do whatever he asks you. That might be an interesting way for us to approach the next chapter in our spiritual discernment together as a congregation. Well, what should we do next? Well, how about we just do whatever Jesus says? Well, that can become challenging because we all have a different individual sense of how that plays itself out. And that's appropriate, and it's helpful, and it's good, and all of it is true to a certain extent. But no one of us, not me, not any one of you, knows the complete mind of God as it pertains to the future of this community and this congregation. The mission that God has set forth to us is something of a mystery still. I don't imagine that the stewards figured that Jesus was going to ask them to fill all of these urns so that there'd be another 180 gallons of wine. Think about that, right? This must have been one heck of a party. Now, recognize that parties in those days, wedding parties in those days in that culture, often lasted a week or more. So maybe they're just not as big as sots as we thought they are, but there were just lots of people coming and going. And it is a celebration of new life coming up for two young people. It is a celebration of the continuing of the community. It is a celebration of the ongoing chosen people's life in relationship to God. And that's true of us as well, as we are called to live out our particular gifts that Paul lists here, the working of miracles, the discernment of spirits, various kinds of tongues, to other the interpretations of tongues. But to remember that they are all, as Paul says, activated by the same Spirit that is at work in us. That requires a commitment to community, a commitment to prayer, and a commitment to conversation. And over the course of our next two liturgical seasons together, the rest of this season of Epiphany and then into Lent, there will be no more critical practice than for us to gather together in community, to pray in the variety of ways that are most natural to us, and then to share the fruit of that prayer as it pertains to our common life together. In Lent, on our Sunday adult forums, we're going to be talking about prayer and temperament, prayer and different personality types. There's a couple of really great resources that I'm going to make some copies of that you can look at as we get prepared to do that, and I want to invite you all to attend at 8:30 as much as you're able, and if there's more interest for something midweek, we can certainly do something on a Tuesday or something like that. But I would encourage you strongly to understand that not everybody is called to the same type of prayer. one of these books uses Myers-Briggs to recommend certain prayer types, and it's called Imaginatively Prayer and Temperament. But there are also other ways that we can understand it and unlock the ways in which we allow God to speak to us. First of all, it is for us to start from a common understanding of what prayer is. Prayer is not our annual visit to Santa's lap, or our weekly visit, or our daily visit to Santa's lap to ask for the things we want. Those things are appropriate and are helpful, and that there are times that we need to ask God what we want. Ask God for what we want, while always being willing to accept what God gives us as being the things that we need. Our prayer life is the place in which we separate the wheat of our desires, the wheat of God's desires for us from the chaff of our wants. You understand the difference, right? There are a lot of things I want that are absolutely no good for me. Donuts. Oh, I got a box of thin Oreos with pistachio filling for Christmas. I'd love to be able to tell you that I'm, rationing the men out. They're long gone. But there's some things that we just don't buy for ourselves. But the commitment I believe that we need to make is for us to have deep conversations as we move out of our Sunday worship and to talk about what's been active in our hearts in the Sunday worship, in our study of Scripture, in our prayer life, and what that means for our daily life and for our future together. I have a suspicion that just like Jesus at Cana of Galilee, God, Jesus, is prepared to bring out the very best in this community. Not after everybody's become drunk, but after we think we may have reached the peak of the party. There is still much good yet to come in the worship and in the ministry and in the witness that we give to this world. What will unlock that, in my humble opinion, is a commitment to prayer and an understanding that it is God who is necessary to form, to reveal, and to hold before us the vision of His coming, the vision of His desires for this community, to let go of the chaff of our wants, so that we can grind the meal of those kernels to make a rich loaf that is to be shared with all and for all and by all. In Jesus' name.
Amen.